When I was in my early 20s, I had a best friend. And at some point, we decided to move in together. And shortly thereafter, she started dating this person, this wonderful man who would eventually become her husband. And all of us lived together for a period of time. And I remember my grandmother telling me, "You don't know the devil until you live with him." And I was still pretty young at the time. I didn't quite understand what she meant until I saw my friend change. And I think that if I were to characterize her behavior and be polite about it, I think that she was acting out some childhood scripts that she had, because she would turn into this monster. And I'd be in a different part of the house and I would hear her screaming at the top of her lungs how much she hated him and these horrific things that made me wonder what was going on. And their relationship, particularly the way that she was treating him, really, really bothered me. And so I kept confronting her about it, which didn't go over that great. And I kept trying to be the peacemaker and the mediator. And what ended up unfolding was that we're no longer friends, and for good reason. But what ended up unfolding surprised me, because he took, in my eyes, the very best care of her. In fact, she would say things like, "Oh, could you just cook for me more? Oh, when I come home from work, could you have a bath and flower petals?" And he was so good about checking the boxes and doing exactly what she asked. And the benchmark kept changing, but he was always there. I really admired him. They got a divorce, by the way, and I was a photographer at his second wedding. And I was so happy for him, because it seemed like he was paired with the right person, finally. And the last I heard from them, which was recently, his new wife, they've been together for a long time now. They have kids, and they're happily married still and doing their thing. So it has a happy ending. But it was very tumultuous, because he kept showing up. He kept checking the boxes, and nothing ever made it okay. And in the end, our friendship broke off, all of us, because I betrayed my best friend. Because she was starting to exit the marriage and engage the affections of somebody who she was interested in. And I asked her not to, and I asked her to tell her husband, because it wasn't okay. And when things progressed, in fact, all of us were going to have an intervention. All of the girls were going to have an intervention with her and say, this is just not okay. And when I saw how hurt her husband was, a mutual friend of mine, of course, the loyalty at first was with my best friend, but he was such a nice person, and it really questioned what loyalty actually is and what the right thing was to do in a situation like this. And all of us were trying to shake her out of what she was doing, and nothing was working. So I told her that, because I was stuck in the middle, and I was having to lie to her husband, who was now my friend, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And so I told her, if you don't tell him, I will. And I gave her a time limit, and she didn't. And so I did tell him in my own way. I told him where to look, where the communications were stored. And that betrayed my best friend and blew up my friendship with her. And it also soured everything. I mean, everything just kind of went up in flames. And that was my first exposure to this idea of box checking, where when you're not really happy inside, you try to control the outside world. And you do so by controlling other people's behavior. And you have an opportunity when you see this in yourself, if you see this in yourself. And I am also a former box checker. And it's fascinating to understand your own psychology when you do this, when you start to observe it. But it's often much easier to observe it first in other people. And although my box checking scripts were less toxic and less extreme than my former best friend, it still comes from the same root, which is, if you just do X, then I'll feel Y, and then everything is going to be okay. If you just do that, can you do that? Once you awaken to this principle, everything in your relationships can be re-examined with this idea of box checking. And once you see it for what it is, you start to understand that indeed all it is that telltale looking outside for happiness. This is what they mean, looking outside for happiness. Aha, we got it. You know, when we hear these things, when we hear teachings, we don't always understand practically what that means. It stays in this abstract, theoretical, and I love the abstract and theoretical. There's no criticism there. But when it comes to understanding our own behavior paradigms, how we actually are driven to mold and shape our environment, sometimes there's a little bit of meaning that gets lost. It reminds me of some of those catechisms, like don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Who came up with that? Where does that come from? It's so weird. It's not intuitive. It's not intuitive unless you've been raised on a farm or in the backwoods country in the 1800s. And you understand, like, oh, okay, when somebody's giving you a gift, don't be hypercritical. But you have to learn that meaning, right? It's not innately built into that. Some of these teachings that are pervasive throughout our society and culture are kind of like that, are kind of like those catechisms, where it's kind of like, okay, but what does that really mean? Like, actually, honestly, really mean? How do I go home and do anything related to this, right? Box checking is one of those principles that's far more intuitive because I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in others. And it really is kind of like making people your errand boys or girls and say, okay, if you just go and get this for me, my latte in a certain way, then the rest of my day is going to be great. And then I'm going to treat you the way that you want to be treated. And then they go and do that. And you're like, yeah, this latte has a little bit too much sugar. I'm sorry. Now I'm going to be in a mood and your life is going to be affected. I remember when I was going through some really, really dark things in my life and I couldn't talk to anybody about it. And I was shutting down, as I tend to do. That's how I tend to go within. And my support network, a couple of them were box checkers like me. And they would say, if you could just be honest, if you could just tell us what's going on. And what they were asking for, they didn't really want. And when I started to communicate about things and I started to open up in my own way, testing the waters a little bit, they couldn't handle it. And I saw that actually it was not what they wanted at all. And this is how you can identify box checking in your life, is that when you deliver what people want, how do they react? Is it with relief or is there another box? You see, that's the thing about box checking, is that as soon as you check that box, there's often immediately another one. It's like the quest giver that never stops giving quests, if you're into video games. Literally, NPCs stand outside of inns and taverns for eternity, giving you quests. And it's like you can always go to them and there's another quest. Your bag is never full of the things that you're trying to mine. And being a box checker is about wrongly identifying that which is actually bothering you. And the way it shows up is people will try to control your communications. So if your pace of communications doesn't fit with their idea of affection, attention, I have been on both sides of this at different points. When I was a box checker and I was dating somebody, their communication pattern was very, very important to me. And because it signaled something to me that held some weight in my mind. And then when I started having my spiritual awakening and I stopped wanting to communicate with people, I realized that a lot of people do this. We have metrics for the good morning, the good night text, and the communication flow. And this is generational dependent too, so it kind of varies, but people set these expectations of how you're supposed to attend in the relationship. And when you start deviating from that formula, then depending on the person and the relationship, there can be feels about it. And so what happens is that people will try to control the communication as a way to take away the negative feeling without identifying where the negative feeling is actually coming from. And so, for example, you might hear, can you text me good morning? Can you just text me good night? Can you just let me know that you're okay? Can you just let me know that you're home okay? Can you just check the box? Can you just turn it down? Can you just cuddle me more? Can you just... And it's great to express your needs, right? I'm 100% behind communicating your needs. But what happens when you are in a relationship or a dynamic with somebody that is actually a pathological box checker? It's very subtle. Because the expectations will be implicitly set. And if you start failing those expectations, you're going to feel it. Even if they don't outright communicate it. And it goes vice versa, right? But the real underlying issue never gets resolved. You're instead building a cage, a communication cage in that example before. Can you just send me a goodnight text? Can you text me in the morning? Yeah, can you just cuddle me a little more? When we control other people's behavior to alleviate some insecurity that we have, it's actually fake. And deep down, there's a part of us that realizes it. And so we subconsciously have a hard time accepting it. And you would be surprised at how often people do this, actually, and how normal it is, because the society that we have been raised in, for whatever reason, rewards this type of behavior, rewards the being assertive, being conscientious, being communicative about, oh, can you just do this? And of course, this is very much specific to the Western world. And what it does, in my personal opinion, is that it creates these illusions that everything is okay when it's not. Have you ever known somebody on the spiritual awakening journey and then gotten to know them more deeply and realized what a mess they were inside? But when you look at their social media, and yoga teachers, I'm not coming for you, but I've known some yoga teachers that have just been mind-blowingly in their shadow. Like, seriously, I knew one in Costa Rica that was still holed up with her ex, but they were done, but she still needed him for some things, and so she went off and started another relationship, but told her ex, don't worry, he's gay. But then get this, right? She goes and visits this new person that she's trying to forge a relationship with. They have a magical time. He's cooking for her. He's showing her around. He's driving her around. He's like really, really, really taking care of her, right? And what does she do? She makes out with his best friend on the beach while the guy that she's trying to forge a partnership with is asleep. But it gets worse. She goes back to her ex, still with the illusion, oh, don't worry, he's gay. And this is somebody who's a yoga teacher, who has retreats, or did, and who has a social media presence of being a teacher, a high vibes, let me teach you how to live your life. And so I'm spilling the tea, apparently. None of this is channeled, by the way. This is, for those of you curious, this is me in my fullest beautiful form. And so she goes back to the ex, and still with this illusion that he's gay. And then she is in a long distance relationship with a guy that treated her amazingly, and trying to get his best friend secretly to come and visit her. Like, mind blown, right? Now, before she leaves, she actually steals from the host. She steals things. And I'm just saying, if you want to practice discernment, there are a lot of people out there, box checkers included, for you to practice your spiritual gift of discernment. Because when we prioritize living in a society where we tell people how to behave and how to check the boxes, it creates this illusion that we're all okay and we're all healed because we say that we're healed. And because who likes shadow work? And now I don't need that. No. Can you just turn it down a little bit? Can you just So listen, I am a reality shifting coach and a shadow patterns coach. We get into the darkness and we actually transmute it. We don't pretend like it doesn't exist. And we get into other people's darkness, your darkness, patterns of darkness that you grew up with, and we resolve it. I kid you not, and sometimes it's uncomfortable. It really is actually sometimes for you and not for me. Although sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable for me too, depending on how dark you are. But I don't pull any punches and I don't let you hide for long. Sometimes a little bit is fine, but we do real intensive shadow work. And if you feel the call, you'll know it. Feel free to reach out to me at sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com. And by the way, I am no longer a box checker. I am reformed, but I still have impulses sometimes, which annoys me. So I am still practicing on my self-mastery journey. It's been years in the making, and I'm not shy about being honest about where I'm at. But our time together is like a catalyst because the work still is ongoing. And if you're up for the challenge, if you're up for the journey, I would love to be your guide.